Okay.
Hello and welcome to Access All Areas of SEND. Today we are talking about sensory informed design, and with me I've got the lovely Liz Lavender. So Liz is an interior designer and expert by experience, specialising in creating sensory informed environments that feel safe, calm and responsive, particularly for people with sensory needs, autism and or learning disability. Creating spaces that support inclusion and well-being. She brings over 20 years of experience in design, project management, and global procurement, alongside lived insight as a parent navigating the mental health and autism service landscape. Liz works across healthcare, education, and residential settings, embedding sensory informed thinking into everyday environments, whether redesigning a community clinic, improving a mental health ward, or co producing a bespoke home. She focuses on creating spaces that support comfort, dignity, and well-being. She's also an associate of design in Mental Health Network, contributing to national conversations of how design can better support mental health outcomes. Guided by the belief that good design supports better outcomes, Liz champions the idea that impact comes from thoughtful, informed choices, not simply increased spend. Her work is rooted in collaboration. She works closely with NHS England South West, Devon Partnership NHS Trust, clinicians, service users, and national design networks to ensure environments are inclusive, evidence-based, and practical, improving environments across settings to support well-being through better design. I mean, that's an amazing bio, Liz. And I know you were a bit like cautious of me reading it out, but it's so important that we read it out. And I know you sent me another helpful document as well, which we're going to go through, because I love that we're having this discussion, because, you know, sensory sort of informed design. I mean, most people wouldn't think anything about it, but actually it's so important, isn't it? Tell me what
Oh,
sensory informed design is about.
it's absolutely fundamental. And I think, Tina, you've probably been along the journey with me, and heard me talk a lot to a lot of people who looked at me very blankly. I actually have to say, most people that I talk to now are on board and get it, which is a huge change and something I'm really proud to be part of. So that's really important. But sensory informed design, a lot of it is actually switching on our radar to understand the impact that the different elements have on how we feel. So my journey started in a mental health hospital parent family room with my son at 15, extremely unwell. And to be quite honest, I was so shocked by the environment as an interior designer. It was just like, oh my God, if you want to make somebody unwell, pop them in here. And what I realised on my journey across different hospitals was that staff are clinical. They don't understand interior design, and why should they? It's not their job. So they're not really understanding the impact that all those different things were having on. So the focus is on identifying the different areas. So light, sound, colour, materials, wayfinding, smell, all those little decisions that come together to make a good design. So it's well thought and responds to the people who use it. Initially, I sat down and wrote a kind of a presentation when I was thinking it through, which was called Autism Interiors, which was all about what I knew about how environments impacted people with sensory needs. Then actually realised it was a lot wider. It was really the design principles that I'd used in the whole of my design work. It was really concentrating on how those individual elements impacted how you feel. So fundamental part of feeling of being in a mental health hospital is feeling safe. And I'd say that's exactly the same for education. You can't teach people if they don't feel safe and calm and centered. And if you're in an environment which is triggering, it doesn't matter how good the teacher is. It doesn't matter how good the everybody around them is, all the equipment. if the lighting's wrong and the colour's wrong and it's too noisy, it's going to fail. So I guess that's my why, and that's my a little bit of a summary about it.
No, it's a really good summary actually, because as you know, my youngest is autistic, and even before I met you, um, I used to say that Harry's issues at school wasn't around his autism. Actually, the most thing that he's got several conditions, but the one condition that causes us the most angst as a parent and as a family is his sensory processing disorder, because his autism is quite well managed. He is highly functional, and he's got severe dyslexia, which is also a neurological condition. But actually, if the sound is not right, or if it's too noisy, or if it's too hot, or if it
Sudden noises.
smells, yeah, he can cope for a little while, but then eventually he'll just go, I can't stay here. I need to move on. I mean, as a young child, that would be displayed as challenging behavior. He would have a meltdown, and we would then have to unpick of why that meltdown happened. So then when you and I met, we've known each other for quite a few years now. Um, it made sense to me when you were talking to me about what you do, and the fact that you're an interior designer by trade, but then have gone into this because of your son. And when we discussed this about doing the podcast, and I mean, you jumped at the chance, I didn't have to ask you really. Um,
Always
was
keen to talk about it, because I think for
absolutely so important.
everybody, yeah, everybody, if you can switch on their radar, people get it. You know, if you, I think it's something that we all are impacted by, but we're not necessarily aware of until somebody goes, "Have you noticed?" And people go, "Oh yeah, I feel really uncomfortable about it." The amount of people that I have virtual calls with who will end up starting to talk about their environment and say, I get a headache all the time, and I find it's like, well, what light have you got?
Yeah.
Can you dim it? Can you turn it off? Can you impact the environment you're in? And I'll speak to them later and go, I've changed my light bulb and it's so much better. And this isn't about spending more, it's making informed choices.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing.
Yeah, and be flexible in the space as well, because what would affect my son may not affect your son either. So it's a
Yeah.
bit of flexibility. So when you and I had this discussion around this podcast episode, you kindly sent me a document, and you've put it as the opening position, and I read it this morning, and I just thought, wow, that is something we just need to think about, and it's so. I'm going to read it in a second, but it's so imperative that we think about these when we're thinking about the rooms of which we're meeting these people in, because you've put the first point of any learning or recovery is to feel safe. An environment shapes how safe we feel. And I read that this morning, and I just thought, actually, that is so true.
Yeah.
So how it sounds very complicated, but you're going to say no, it's quite simple to do. It's just probably a few things that you need to think about. But tell us, that if that's your opening thought with any of your clients, and we'll talk about the Brook in a minute, because that's a real high
Yeah.
point, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell me, how, if you've got a child that is, has behavior with that challenges, and you think it's this sort of environment that they're in, and they want to feel safe, how hard is that to do, or is it quite achievable? And you say about the money, because money is always important, especially when you're talking to services that provide something to the public, because it's the public purse. So how simple is that, to work in an environment that makes you feel
Mm.
safe?
A lot of it is very simple and can be done as part of a continuous improvement model. So for me, if every time you paint the walls, you paint them the right colour, in the right finish, if it's matte so it doesn't reflect light, they're still available in scrubbable, wipeable, but it's matte, so it's a lot softer. That would make an instant change. If every time you change your lighting, it's in the right colour and it's dimmable, it has a significant change. If every time you think about how much clutter you've got on your walls, it's a simple one. Visual clutter creates too much information going in. So you tend to walk into a lot of environments and there's visual clutter everywhere. Actually, reduce it. Reduce it. Have an area in, say, your classroom or anywhere, which is a quiet area, a visual quiet area. Then think about how you absorb sound. That's more difficult because it tends to be school environments, hospital environments, they're all hard surfaces. And sound is like a ping pong ball. It travels around, it bounces off surfaces until it hits somewhere soft. If that were in a home environment, you'd have things like carpet, cushions, the sofa, all of those things are absorbing sound. In a classroom, you don't have that. But what there are is sound absorbing panels, which can go on the ceiling, which can go in the walls. You can have felt notice boards. So it's really been informed about every time you do make a change, make an informed one. What is the impact this is going to have on the environment and how can I improve it? And once you've switched on your radar and understand those elements and make those design choices based on that, it has each one makes a change, and then you make 2 changes and it starts to have a rolling impact. So I think for me, a lot of it is about, first of all, for any changes, understand the impact of those elements and then which will support you to make decisions which then impact the environment. So I think people overthink it. The amount of times I hear people say, oh, we're going to do a sensory room. And it's like, well, actually, maybe you just need a quiet space. Maybe you just need somewhere that people can go out and sit quietly, or find that little bit, I'm a bit overwhelmed at the moment, I need to go and sit somewhere quiet. Actually, that's what my son needed. And I'm sure that's what your son needed. And quite often, for me, when I've been out with him and we go to meetings or we go to things, if I say to him at the start, if you feel a bit overwhelmed or it's getting too much for you, you could go here. That might be a space outside. That might be a space inside that's quieter. There's never any issue because he can leave and he knows where to go. And he can sit quietly and then he can come back in when he feels ready. It's giving that escape route, if you like, and that safe, quiet space to sit. So I think people overthink it, and that's a big, big danger. And I would say, people tend to be terrified of employing a designer. It's a bit like, oh my goodness, they're going to be really expensive. Actually, they're not. But good design advice saves thousands, and it gives you, we do have quite extensive training. There's a reason why we pick the colours. There's a reason why we choose the lighting. There's a reason why we do the things that we do. So for me, it's value that and value the impact that it has, because if you get a core, this is how we're going to approach the issue, you can then do it in a planned, organised way.
Okay, so you talk about the classroom. So then what does that mean, or why does this matter for special educational needs and disabilities? So, what does it help with anybody with SEND, or is there particular people that it affects with special education?
I would say anybody who goes into a different environment away from their home is already stressed and anxious. So, that's you, that's me, that's anybody. If you've got special educational needs, or you have any element of sensory difficulty or how you process, it just becomes heightened. So you throw in stress, throw in it's a different environment, throw in you don't know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and your sensory alert system is up here. So it kind of doubles it. And everybody's different, so you need adaptable environments, you need flexibility, you need to be able to dim the lights, you need to think about different areas for regulation for different places that people can go. So if you know, for me, every classroom in SEND should be linked to an outdoor space, because you can just go and regulate outside through movement. Some people might want to cocoon. So you need to kind of think about how the building responds to the needs. So for me, it's informing that whole kind of, how do we as designers, both in the building and the interiors, respond to flexible needs? Because everybody is different, as you said, and everybody responds in different ways at different times and wants different things. So you need the building to work with you. It's the extra member of staff, Tina. It's the one you're not fighting against.
No, it definitely is. And I think, I talked about, my son's experience with sensory overload, where that could display as challenging behaviour. I mean, not now. He's quite articulate. He can tell me that it's too much for him, and he knows the signs now of when
He's
he's
learned
overloaded.
them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And he's in his early 20s now, so he's had these conditions. What we've known about these conditions for a long time. I guess that, with this, and this podcast is non-political, so we don't really talk about the politics that surround, like the school's white paper, for instance, which has been released. One of the expectations of the government is that we have inclusion bases within school settings. And I think this conversation is quite pertinent to that, isn't it? That you've just said, in order for a child to regulate, to learn about themselves and learn about the tricks of self-regulation, they need a space that they can do that in. It's no good having a mainstream classroom that's noisy. I mean, even a special school classroom actually
Even
is
a special
noisy.
school is needed, and
Yeah,
I always go back to, my son went to a middle school, coped really well in the education system, never really a concern until he went to senior school, and it is quite classic with people and I see it a lot. And I would have teachers phoning me up going, I don't know what's wrong. He keeps walking out of the classroom. He's sitting in the classroom with his hands over his ears. I wasn't really that autism informed at the time, and it wasn't really a massive conversation. But he would walk and leave the school, and I wonder how different it would have been if he could have left. People got what was going on, adjusted the classroom that he was in. But if he could have left to a quiet space for a little bit and then gone back in when he was less overwhelmed, what a difference that would have been. And if there were quiet spaces within those buildings, but it's not just schools, it's every hospital, every public environment, really. It's thinking about how do we make them so everybody can access. And I think, not being political, but the white paper says about creating calm spaces. So then I think the work needs to be to understand how you create calm spaces within that. And I again, you go back to when I started first working with NHS teams and people talking to me, there was an awful lot of language about, it had been identified lighting was an issue. It was being identified that the environments were noisy, the doors banged, whatever. There was an awful lot of conversation about it, but nobody said, what's the solution? And that, for me, as a designer, it's like, we know what the issues are. We all know what the issues are. If I went into any school, I'm sure they'll tell me the similar things. These are the issues. And the next stage is then, how are we going to come up with solutions which are cost effective and work? It's not kind of randomly. I think the danger is, if it's not informed by good design, the money won't be used in the most effective way. And I think it's about getting that information out there for me.
yeah. And I absolutely, and I mentioned it very briefly about the Brook. So this is a project that was really close to your heart, and quite rightly, because it won design awards. So tell me about the Brook, because it's really, really important, isn't it? The Brook to you.
The book was a huge It was a fantastic opportunity for me. I did some talks very early on when they were going to develop two specialist hospitals in the Southwest, specifically for people with a learning disability and or autism. So they had to be sensory informed. So I was initially part of the community practice. So I was invited to talk at those, and I think I was asked to speak for 15 minutes and ended up speaking for about an hour. keep talking. And then after that, Devon Partnership Trust invited me to sit on the oversight panel for the Brook, which I started off sitting on the oversight panel. And of course, as I've got, I guess I'm really unique because I've got the understanding of autism. I've been through the system, but I'm also a designer. So I had this kind of unique thing, and it was a really amazing co-production, really, because I was able to work alongside the architect and alongside the interior designer for the project, because I come from a beautiful high-end houses angle, not the it's got to work in a robust hospital environment. So I worked with them and learnt lots along the way, and we all work together, and I'm really, really proud. So it's just things like the family room. It's got access to a garden, it's got lovely warm colours, there's sound absorbing. So yeah, I'm hugely proud of it. So just walking in that family room, I still feel quite emotional because it was something very close to my heart, that if any family went in there to meet their person, their friend or their family member, that they had a safe space that they could share time with. But it's radically different, and there is a Design Mental Health Network. There's a podcast, a webinar we did linked with NHS England and with Design Mental Health Network to share the learning, because so much has been learned, not only from a design perspective, from a build perspective. We work with Kia, we all, I think all hugely proud of how different it is, but also there is learning from that, which can then go forward as well. So I'm already working on things that we learned from that build and how we can take that forward. Products that weren't available, different ways of doing things. So I think I spent the whole kind of thing going, why? Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Could we do that? And, it was a really open opportunity, and everybody co-produced. So I think there's that whole, when you're asking why all the time, people could get really fed up, but they didn't.
And do you think that this is a difference sometimes between almost life and death, that we're talking about the feeling of safe within an environment? Because what I know about anybody who suffers with autism and or has got a different condition but has sensory processing issues, that you do go into that fight or flight mode. And a lot of the times it is the environment that you're in that causes that fight or flight sort of momentum. Do you think that the difference between a sensory informed design and not can really make that person not go into fight or flight mode, perhaps, and can be life changing for that person that's in that environment?
Absolutely. If, the fundamental thing for me is, if you don't feel safe, you're not going to be able to talk to anybody, you, me, or anybody, and particularly somebody with heightened sensory awareness. And I think for me is always reflect how you would feel in that situation. You are away from home, you are with people you don't know, in an environment that is where you don't feel safe. Why would you trust anybody? And if you don't trust, the first thing is feel safe is the fundamental grounding bit for starting to trust people to move forward. And I chair care and treatment reviews across the Southwest, and the amount of times the first thing the young person or the person will talk to us about is how difficult they're finding the environment. And staff will be saying, well, they won't come out of their room, they won't engage with us, they won't, well, actually, it's too overwhelming for them to come out of the room because it's too noisy. So I think there's a whole piece of work about how you can change existing environments and how you can build new ones in an informed way.
Yeah, and I think lots of people that might be listening to this who, work in buildings and building design would go, oh, well, that's fine, but is it up to standard? Is it up to code? And you can have both.
Absolutely. The Brook was it's a secure mental health hospital, so everything had to be to that standard. But I think through that really challenging, do we have to do it like this? Could we do it like that? Could it be in that colour? Could it be in that material? Could we have those lights? Could we do it like this? Actually challenged what would have automatically been done. So I think we've almost got into a kind of process of design and build within those environments and probably within schools where it's like, this is what we do. And it's about coming back and going, how could we do that differently? It's still got to meet the same design criteria, can't speak now, same design criteria, but how can we make more informed choices? I knew from my design perspective, where I'd worked in, I'd done bars and restaurants, that there was fabric which you could throw a bottle of red wine over, you could smear your dinner in, and actually you clean it, it's antibacterial, clean it, next day it looks perfect. So why weren't those being used in mental health hospitals? Why is the default, let's use vinyl, which reflects sound, so it's not helping with the sound. It looks really institutional. It doesn't feel very nice. When we've got fabrics which have been around for quite a long time, which are antibacterial, scrubbable, whatever, but actually feel nice. So all of those challenges, and that comes back to things like, infection control, we've got to, and we can't do that. But actually, we just got the infection control team, wonderful team, around the table, went through the specs and said, but could we use this? And we zoned off the plan and said, well, this is high risk, this is medium risk, and this is actually it's an office off the ward. It could be any fabric, really, commercial grade fabric. So we went through the fabrics and we went through the specs for each one and chose them appropriately. So it's being aware of what's available and not going back to the classic, which I've heard so often, we always do it like this. And I get that whole thing. We have a policy, we always do it like that. But products change, products evolve, products move on. And also I think there's an element where we should be challenging manufacturers going, we can't do this at the moment, so could we design something like that? Which is, again, hugely exciting to be able to do. So there's the fabrics, just a simple thing. Mental health hospitals tend to be painted with acrylic eggshell paint. It's got a sheen on it. So it reflects. It reminds me, Tina, of school toilets. That slight sort of sheeny, reflective thing that you think, oh, I feel uncomfortable in here. Why? Because it's really durable. I knew there were other options. So instead of kind of arguing my case, I just went away and checked the specs. So Dulux Sterishield has an eggshell, which is wipeable. But Dulux Sterishield has a matte, which is scrubbable and less expensive. So it's matte, it absorbs the light, it feels softer. So get it in the right colour, you've saved money in your painting process and you've got the right colour. That's a tick. So I think you have to kind of go through it every way. It's like tick, tick, tick.
Yeah. And it's also durable, isn't it? And this is the thing, isn't it? Is that people just they design or they do the same sort of thing everywhere they go because they're just it's compliance, isn't it, rather than
It's kind of this sort of steamroller thing of I was described the build process. It's like a train and it goes along the tracks and it has certain stops. So you've got to get your information in at the right place, but then it's knowing about when to ask the right questions, which was why it was such a good collaborative thing, because we all went on that journey with, the contractor saying, we need these answers, and us going, okay, what's the best answer? What's the best way we could do this? And then kind of feed that in and then go on to the next stop. So I think that was, it is about working together. It is about being collaborative, but it is also really thinking about the decisions you make and the impact they have every time you choose something.
So what needs to change then? What conversations do we need to have within when we're looking at, say, these bases that are going to be built on schools, or maybe they're not being built and they're just a space that's already there, but they're going to convert it. Or, you're a teacher looking at your classroom thinking, I've got some children that are coming in, or some of the children I've been working with have had behaviour that challenges. Let's look at the environment they're in. What's that starting point? What needs to change in order for this to happen more?
So I think it's build an understanding of the impact, because once you understand how those parts all interplay, then you can start to influence the decisions and go, have we thought about that? That'll be my dog answering the door. So as part of the funding from NHS England South West, I was able to set up the Environmental Hub. So the Environmental Hub is free to everybody. It's supported by the Design and Mental Health Network. We are going to be adding to it all the time and developing it. But what it does is it breaks it down by each of the elements. So sound, light, colour, and gives you a very basic overview, really simple, so that it's a starting point for you. It tells you the things to kind of focus on. So if you didn't know anything about it, that's a good starting point. It's free, just gives you an overview of each element, and then you can start to, there's kind of lots of research behind it. So also on the Design and Mental Health Network, there is a recording of the webinar that we did, which gives, again, that's free to access. It talks about the whys, it talks about how the designers worked on the design of the building, it has me, Steve and Anita the architect talking about the whys of light, sound, colour for an hour. So it gives you a really good free overview of the things to switch on about and the impact that they have. So my passion was, we've learned so much on the book. We've learned so much that is transferable across so many settings. How can we share it? So that's why we did the webinar. So it talks from, we have the lead for estates from NHS England South West. We've got Graham Carr from NHS England South West. So we have Anita architects, we have occupational therapists. So everybody talks about how they worked within that role. So there's lots of information free there that can be picked up. But those two would be, here's loads of free information on how to get started.
And we will put the links in the sort of bio, the readables on that is linked to the podcast. And then the video version, which is on our YouTube channel, will add in stuff there. Okay, so what is because I'm reading the document that you kindly sent over, because I'm new to this thing as well, although we chat about it all the time. I think for a closing sort of statement, I think for the end, because we're coming to the end of the time of the pod, of this episode, what is the fundamentals? You've called them pillars. What is the fundamentals of when you're looking around your room that you want to be more sensory aware? You want it to be more comfortable for those people that do suffer with their senses and sensory inputs, what is the 4 things you've called them pillars? Do you want to share that before we close?
I call them they're my 4 pillars. They're the key things that I would think about every time I walk into any room: light, sound, colour, and materials, and how do they interplay. So break it down. My tip to anybody is break it down. Don't become overwhelmed, because you almost freeze and you don't know what to do. It's break it down, those elements, and understand how they're impacting, and change them one at a time, and you will be amazed how it starts to improve. So concentrate on those 4. There are others, smell, wayfinding, there are others, but those are the 4 pillars that I would start with.
Okay, and then you literally just work through it.
Work through it. How is the light impacting me? What's the direction of the sunlight? Can I dim that when it comes into the room? What colour is the light? What paint colour is it? What finish is it? Again, direction of the light coming into the room. How does it change during the day? How much visual clutter is it? What patterns are around? Is there a quiet place for me to sit? What materials are there? My absolute reference for any material choice is just go back to nature. And there's so much research which evidences the views to nature and how natural materials are and the impact they have on our physical and mental health. It's everywhere. So there's loads to read. Again, there's some things on the Environmental Hub where you can read, and I'm going to be updating that shortly. But reference nature one step at a time. And don't be overwhelmed. It is break it down and don't panic, which might be mine.
Yeah, because the idea is that you're just making it simpler, aren't you, rather than making it more complicated.
No. Just make it really simple.
Yeah.
Lighting, colour, materials, and sound. Just break it down, each one, and then just sit in a room. I always say to people, it's about turning on your radar, sit in the room and just take it in and break it down. How is the colour impacting me? What's going on the walls? Is it really, I would say, visually noisy? Is it really visually noisy? Is there what's going on? Can I take it all in? Because if you put too much information, you become overwhelmed. And the kind of classic statement for me is less is more. And it's a design principle that we are taught from, our early design training. For me, that always sits true. People tend to forget that people add colour. So they tend to kind of add, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. Actually, you don't. You actually need to take everything out, strip it back, make it simple, because people add colour, they add noise, they add the whole visual activity. So keep it simple.
Brilliant.
Less is more.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much, Liz, for doing this episode. I'll put all the links in the bio for the podcast. Please do get in touch with Liz if you have any questions. She's very helpful, and you can have a conversation, couldn't you, about the design?
I'm always happy to have a chat. I always say to people when they're going, oh, it's just actually have a virtual cuppa. I have kind of a whole load of kind of I've been here and done it things which I can share, things that didn't work, things that did, things I'd try. I'm always open up for a chat.
Brilliant. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.